know, it is. You always find one nugget of gold.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and many thanks for joining us this evening again. Tonight our webinar is on S&C training for the youth athlete, and we're delighted to be joined by Gary Jemison, Dan Moore, Marion Earls and Des Earls for the presentation tonight. Prior to tonight's webinar, coaches would have submitted preferred topics and questions for the panel to discuss this evening. So the panel will review these and will aim to cover as many as they can over the webinar tonight. In relation to the presentation quality, can I ask everyone to make sure their cameras and microphones are off, as if they're not, and they'll affect the quality of the presentation. If you have a question during the presentation or during it or at the end, please use the chat option and the panel will answer as we go along or at the end. The presentation will be recorded tonight, and we're currently putting a Wicklow Coaching and Games YouTube channel together, coaching channel, so you'll be able to get access to it on that along with any of the resources that the guest coaches will talk about tonight. Without further ado, I'll pass you on to Gary Jemison, who will introduce the panel for the webinar tonight. Okay, Gary.
That's great, Paul. Thanks a million. And just first of all, thanks to Paul and Wicklow GAA for having us on. I'm looking forward to the next kind of hour and 15 minutes. I really hope that you attending here will get something that you can kind of put into practice straight away as we get back on the pitches over the next coming weeks. Before we intro, I suppose, just a little run through about the structure of the next hour. Rather than go through and cover similar topics that other counties have done recently on speed and strength and agility like that, we've decided we're going to share what Kildare and other counties have. We have some links at the end that we will, when we forward on the slides, we will attach those to you. So rather than mimic what they've done, we are going to set up a slightly different structure to this next hour. You have come in and looked for us to talk about speed. So for section number one, we'll discuss speed. We'll have all the coaches talk us through the different strategies they use when introducing speed in their training. On the second section, we'll run through a Q&A. The questions you've sent in, we'll try to tick as many of them off as we can and try to be as active as possible here, because if questions crop up on topics as we discuss them, I'd like you to bang them in, and then if we can get those questions covered off as quick as we can, we will do and get through as many as we can. There were other questions on that didn't make the list, but when we send out the slides, I will attach my email and you can bang me on an email, and I'll gladly discuss them and catch up with some of you during the week if we don't get through them here today. And then the last topic we will cover will be just a return to play, and conclude then hopefully at about 9:15, hopefully, if that's okay with the coaches on. So I suppose before we go any further, I'll introduce you to three coaches. We have Marion firstly here. Marion, if you want to give a brief description of where you've come from and what you've been doing and where you are now, I'm sure they're very interested to hear.
Sure. So I started off my career, I did sports and exercise science in UL. And from there, I did a master's in the University of Edinburgh in strength and conditioning. After my master's, I went and did quite a lot of unpaid internships, along with paid internships with Connacht Rugby and a lot of football teams, Scotland Rugby, Edinburgh Rugby, and went on. I found a spot in the IRFU with the Emerging Sevens team. From there, I worked with the Women's World Cup team in 2013, where we finished fourth in the World Cup. And at the same time, I was also lecturing in LIT for a year. After that World Cup, I took on the academy lead role with Connacht Rugby. So I led all the academy in Connacht. And take the Sevens lead S&C for 3.5 years there. Since then, I've opened up my own gym in Wicklow Town the last 2.5 years. And we've been delivering programs from Pilates to strength and conditioning to one-to-one sessions with general populations and also sporting people. Thank you, Gary.
And you left out old cripples like me. You've been trying to train too and keep me taking over, Marion. So I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but thanks for trying. Next up, Dan Moore. if you want to jump in there.
Education, I probably had a similar one to Marion. So I did a bachelor's degree in DCU. I started in 2007. I just finished my master's there last year with Setanta College. I started coaching in 2011. I went down to New Zealand and spent a year in New Zealand with a team called Stags. I came back in 2012 and worked with Dublin GAA. So I was assistant senior S&C coach to the minors and to the under 21s that year that both won All Ireland. Since then, I've been working in Blackrock College. So I've been in Blackrock College now as their head of S&C for the last 7 years. I also work in Lansdowne Rugby Club. I also coach some international athletes, some national level athletes, and I work as a tutor for Athletics Ireland. So I do their introduction to strength and conditioning module.
Excellent. You're all making me feel very inadequate now with your CVs all of a sudden. I'm kind of feeling very inferior here.
Background there, he's going to be checking things out are working from the off. Some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not. We have a slight change in the way we run our questions. So you'll see kind of a comment bubble with a question mark in it.
Sorry, Paul, speaker quality isn't great there. I don't know if you can hear me there. That's very, can anyone else hear that?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Gary?
Yeah, happy now.
Yeah.
Right, so happy there to fire away now, Des, please.
Yeah, how are you doing, folks? Yeah, my name is Des. I am a St. Pat's man originally. I was, like Dan, I went to DCU. I think I was the year ahead of you, Dan, actually.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And yeah, so I did an undergrad in sports science.
I think it took me a bit longer to get there, though. It might have taken me a few extra years.
That's all right, it all counts. Yeah, I did a master's in S&C from St. Mary's in Twickenham. Worked with DCU High Performance Unit for a number of years. Did a bit of work then in GAA. So I've worked with the Armagh senior footballers and I've worked with the Wicklow senior footballers for a number of years. And at the moment, I head up the S&C and sports science at Kilmacud Crokes for their hurlers and footballers. At the moment, my day job is a lecturer in IT Carlow. So we have courses in sports science, strength conditioning and athletic therapy. So I work across a range of those subjects. So delighted to see everyone here giving their time and looking forward to some good questions.
Brilliant. Right, thanks a million, guys. Shall we just get straight into it because we have a lot to get through and let's not waste any time. I suppose so. If we start off at speed, and for the purpose of tonight, we're talking about the youth athletes. So I suppose that is we're looking at kind of the 12 to 17-year-olds in the learn to train phase of the long-term athlete development pathway. And starting off, I'm sure we have coaches here from rugby and soccer and Gaelic and hurling and across the board, coaches that have athletes playing in all of them. But if we speak from GA for the next hour, we'll have to really kind of know the demands of our sport before we start introducing exercise into our training. So when we talk about speed, I think the first thing that pops into a lot of people's head is, we kind of think of Usain Bolt or the 100-meter sprint. It's just kind of a natural thought process. But when we look at speed within GA context, we know it's a multi-directional sport. There's a lot of acceleration, deceleration. It's a contact sport where there's a lot of tackling and evasion. And obviously there's a skills component on top of that then where we're working with the ball and the hurl, and then there's the rules and restrictions around the 4 steps and the plays, and I'm sure we're all well aware of all of that, but it's important that we realise that we're not just training straight line sprinters here when we look to training. So there's also additional components when we're looking at our players. We know that speed, when we work with speed, is speed with the ball, speed without the ball. There's the anticipation. There's reaction, so people who react quicker obviously will be quicker to get to the ball or to track a defender, and then there's decision making. So we have all those in front of us, and the people who can make the decisions quicker obviously will move quicker or be more effective on the pitch. But I suppose when we look at a speed context, Marion, when we keep that in mind, I suppose, where do you start when you're looking at introducing speed work into training with teams?
So it's really important, I think, to, like you said, Gary, to reiterate the point of the importance of speed within a team, or especially with these youth players. It's really important to recognise that although we're training speed within these youth players, it's not just speed that we're training for these guys. We're looking at joint conditioning, we're looking at soft tissue conditioning, ligament conditioning, like Achilles, calves, hamstrings. So it's really important for us to look at our position, technical output, which you'll talk about later. What we like to consider is that we put speed at the start of all of our sessions. So we go through a thorough warm-up. We go through some of our speed drills that we will have ingrained in these players for ideally years that they have been training with their football team. So that's a really important factor to consider, that we don't just go 1 week, oh, you know what, guys, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to train speed. It always has to be, if we're really going to work hard to develop speed within our players, it's important that we always have that component within our training session. It can have an emphasis at times, and it can be de-emphasis at times. But once we have it within our program on a continual basis, that's what makes these guys better and more conditioned to deal and cope with speed, especially in terms of use with hamstrings and calves, etc. So, like I said, the start of the session, thorough warm-up, go through your A skip, B skip, all of your conditioning drills, and then you can look at your acceleration components, so 0 to 5, 0 to 10. You can look at your maximal velocity components up to 40, 50 meters. But football really is about, it is quite a lot of the time agility. Like you said, whether it's with the ball, without the ball, if you're receiving the ball, if you're delivering the ball, you're talking about upper body agility too, you know what I mean? So it's important to have that as an important focus. So how the whole body reacts to a stimulus in terms of agility. So it's important that when we train speed, that we don't do it in a fatigue state. So you wouldn't do a whole training session, and at the end of the training session, you would say, okay, let's work on our speed now and do 50 meters or something. So when they're freshest, when they have least fatigue, and within a weekly schedule, it's important to go maybe at the start of the week or when they've had a break midweek. Maybe teams train Monday, Thursday, Saturday, I don't know. But if you did your speed work maybe on a Monday and a Thursday after they've had a break, is where I would tend to slot it in. One big thing that we had as an issue with some of our team sports was, say our first point of call for speed was Monday morning or a Monday session, and a lot of the players were traveling or were sitting in cars for a while before they came to the session. And what happened was they were really stiff in their backs, really stiff in their hips, really stiff in their hamstrings. And although we did a thorough warm-up, it actually wasn't an effective strategy for us to train speed because they weren't in the prime state. So we ended up changing where we put that in the week. So it's important that their pre-state is good enough that they get what they want out of the session, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah, crystal clear. One important thing you did say there is, and it's kind of an area that I would see across a couple of teams, that they nearly ignore speed work early on in the year. If the preseason, they think it's not as important. They're more worried about kind of getting kilometers into the legs rather than just working on kind of the speed thing. It's a huge issue. And then when they kick into the game straight away, all of a sudden, the minute they start playing, they're loading those muscles and joints and ligaments and tendons, like you say, yet they aren't conditioned to take that load. And sometimes, Gary, when you're playing opposition, like you might have gone through a high volume period and you might look sluggish or you might look fatigued. And in maybe coach's mind, it's like, oh gosh, we're not fast. This team is really a lot faster than us. So they might come out of that game being like, we're not as fast as our competition. Let's work on speed. You know what I mean? I kind of see that quite a lot. So it's like you have to consider all components. And it's really important as a protective mechanism for, like we said, the soft tissue, that you keep it in and a minimal stimulus all the time as best you can. Absolutely, brilliant. And so then, Dan, if we can bring you in there, looking further into that, then, if we know the kind of the when and the why, what do we start to look for then when we start training? What do we want our athletes to look like, and what would this session look like?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with what I want them to look like first. So in terms of linear speed, which is I think what we're talking about here, so just running in a straight line, we're not going to talk about change of direction or anything like that. I'll just split it into maybe a top speed day and an acceleration based day. So with that acceleration based day, what I want to see is I'm going to look at their upper body first. Okay, right? So I'm not going to look at their lower body first. Okay, if I'm looking at the technical elements of their sprinting, I'm going to look at their upper body first. Okay, the reason I'm going to do that is the muscles are activated by the brain. Okay, the brain sits much closer to the shoulders than it does to the hip joint. Okay, so any inefficient movement or any energy leaks that happen in the upper body or the arm swing is just going to be multiplied by the lower body. So what I want to see is shoulders back and down, okay, or you're trying to get your athletes to tuck their shoulder blades into their back pocket, okay. So some really good exercise. I know you asked me for some really good exercise on this. So band pull aparts, okay, band pull aparts or anything that will work on the muscles of the back of the shoulder are going to be really effective for this. So what you're trying to look for is that the arms swing forward and back in straight lines. Okay, they should be parallel to each other. If what we see is that the arms come across the body, what will usually happen there is there will be a really big energy leak. Okay, and then that will have to be counteracted by the lower body. Okay, so if my right arm swings across my body, my left knee is also going to swing across my body. So in speed, okay, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So if I'm running in a straight line, I want everything moving forward and back in that direction. Okay, so the first thing I'll always look for is the arm action of that athlete. Okay, the second thing I'll look for then, okay, I want to see a 45 for my acceleration is I want to see a 45-degree angle body lean. Okay, so again, if we look at the physics of it, okay, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, if I drive down into the ground, I'm going to stand up. Okay, or my hips are going to get higher, my center of gravity is going to get higher. If I move forward at that 45-degree angle, I'm going to accelerate much more efficiently. Okay, so what I'm looking for is positive shin angles. Okay, so I'm looking for the shin angles that match the torso. Okay, so I don't want people upright, I want people at that 45-degree angle. Okay, like I said, every action has that equal and opposite reaction. If they're driving back into the ground, I know they're going to be accelerating efficiently. Then the last thing I'll look for is the lower body action. Okay, so if they're cycling their feet, okay, again, it's going to be very, very inefficient. When we're accelerating, we want our feet to move like pistons. Okay, so they should be moving forward and back. Okay, like I said, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Okay, it's not in a big circle. So they're the three things that I will always look for. So anytime I'm looking at an athlete running and I'm trying to make a technical improvement, I will always watch them face on first. Okay, then I'll move to the side. So I want to make sure their shoulders are down and back in a good posture position, swinging forward and back. Then I want to make sure they're in a good body angle. Then lastly, I want to make sure their feet are moving like pistons and not swinging around like they're cycling a bike. What that looks like within a session then, okay, so the progressions I will use, and I think, Gary, you said that you've got some links to these videos that will be posted after, but what I'm looking, so I will start with an A march, okay, which is very, very simple, and I'm looking at, like I said, those three positions, okay, that will progress to an A skip, which will just be a little bit quicker. Then I'm going to progress them to a wall drill where they're focusing on the same technical cues, okay, shoulders back, feet moving like pistons, okay, but they're at that 45-degree angle, and then I'll progress them to a resistance run. Okay, so a lot of the research that I've looked at, okay, by a French guy called J.B. Marin, he's shown that just resisted sprinting increases athletes' horizontal efficiency. Okay, well, he's French, so sometimes the translations don't work out as well, but what he basically means is putting players into that resisted position, okay, either with a band or with a sled, allows them or forces them almost to accelerate efficiently. Okay, the only way to move that sled is to drive the ground back. If you stand up and get out of that 45-degree angle, you're not going to move the sled. So that would be how I would structure a session. Within a training week, like Marion said, yes, they need to be fresh for that. They need to be primed for that. I know Charlie Francis, who was Ben Johnson's coach when he was winning Olympic titles and setting world records, he would say that any effort below 95% just isn't going to cause an adaptation to speed. So we need really, really high quality of effort. We need long rest periods, and we need probably minimal reps. We need the quality is far more important than that quantity.
And that's actually key, just on your last point there, that's key. Like Marion was saying earlier, if we play a team that's fastest, next team kind of hit the panic button, we think, oh, let's get back to the drawing board. We need to make these guys faster. They will overload with a huge volume of speed, which is not what you want, because we know damn well if they aren't completed at max effort or as near to max effort as we can get, in the absence of fatigue where possible, that it has a nearly negative effect of what we're trying to get. So to break up the speed drills, obviously ways to manipulate that rest period. If we have them in groups of 30, we can break them into maybe a ratio of kind of 5-to-1 or 6-to-1, where we'll have them running in 4s or 5s, obviously, and then that will allow us to get back around to the group. Again, those kind of groups that in front of them have gone, obviously that'll allow for sufficient rest. Other ways, I suppose, of manipulating those rest periods, we can add in maybe a couple of sets after a warm-up, then we might go into the skills section where the kind of it's active rest, and then repeat those, either those marches or those resisted sprints or just simple sprinting for that matter, once they're well rested.
A really simple framework to work is just 1 minute recovery for every 10 meters that they've sprinted. So if they're running a 20-meter sprint, try and give them 2 minutes recovery. That seems to work quite well, and the quality of effort doesn't drop.
And if I take off my S&C hat and put on my football coach's hat, if I have these guys, especially if we're talking kind of 12 to 17-year-olds, and we only have them for a small period of time, it's less is more really. It's kind of warm up, a couple of good quality sprints, and then we're loaded up. We get our skill work or football, because there's some great questions later on, and they kind of look at where we can squeeze everything in. But like you say, a couple of good quality sprints are better than 7, 8, 10, 12 minutes of poor quality work. And we have links to those marches and those wall drills and things like that later on that we will send when we forward out these slides. So any of those exercises that pop in that Dan has mentioned, you'll be able to click in and have a look at those. So then if we move along then onto you, where we can, what other avenues can we go down to besides, say, gym work? Obviously, when we're training with youth athletes, we know, like Dan has said, they have that growth period where they can be kind of sloppy, that adolescent period where they're weak and they're leaking energy, and they mightn't have those good running mechanics. So kind of once we've enforced those and we've ticked that box and we have them moving quite well, what other avenues can we go down to improve speed and power kind of with these youth players?
So I guess, like as Dan said, we could obviously use resisted sprint work if you have access to it, or if you're allowed sleds or prowlers or some sort of resistance. Or you can pair players up if you have access to bands or kind of quite resilient training gear that people can kind of hang out of. You can get your athletes into that forward lean position that Dan talks about. You could use fences to do things like the wall drill, as he mentioned. Or if you have a nice kind of banked hill. So I know some of the pitches in Balnakill are bordered by some nice hills that we would have done some work with the senior players in the past. Other than that, I suppose simple plyometric exercises will be quite effective. So really what we want to do with sprinting is to minimize the amount of time that the athlete spends on the floor. And one of the ways we will do that is through exercises called plyometrics. And really what those plyometric exercises are trying to do is to get the athlete to contact the floor at the right kind of angle that you're looking for, depending on the drill, and to either project themselves forward or straight up. If it's more acceleration stuff you want to work on, you're going to look for them to project themselves forward, so kind of bounding or big jumps forward. And if it's more kind of max velocity work, then you're going to want them to project themselves up. So things like pogo jumps or hurdle jumps would be very useful. And these things require very, very little equipment, if any at all. Really all you need is just a bit of space. And as Gary said, he'll provide you with video links to show you some of those exercises. I suppose one of the key considerations for plyometrics or any of these kind of things for the coaches that we have on board is you guys are all kind of experts in the kind of technical and tactical side of games. And really we think about speed and strength and power in the same way. We think of speed as a skill. So you're just kind of starting off with the basics of your skills work. As Dan mentioned, some of those postures and positions. As Marion mentioned, doing it at the right time of the week and the right time of the day. You know, you're not going to practice a particularly difficult skill at the end of a training session when everyone's fatigued. So just think of speed as a skill and coach it in the same way that you would coach whatever kind of skill that you're working from. So from simple kind of punt passing, making sure they hit off the lace, to David Clifford curling them in from the sideline. It's a continuum, and we think of speed in the same way, to just start off with the basics first and then progress yourselves on.
Absolutely. unfortunately, for like me, it doesn't matter how long you practice at skill, or this triangle never increased my speed when I was playing. It's a lot to do with genetics too. So if you have a guy who's really slow, it takes a lot to increase. You won't make someone lightning fast, I suppose, if genetically they are quite slow. But we can definitely make them better by making them move as efficiently as they can. Kind of can make them strong, so they can they have that power output when they're doing those marches or sprinting or accelerations. And we can definitely improve it, but it takes time. It takes consistency. And it's important that we kind of view it all year round. And what I would say is, again, if I go back to my previous point about being limited with time, there's no reason why we can't increase kind of speed and reaction and anticipation with our skills work. So if we are stuck for time and after a warm up, we can add in the likes of speed work and off the mark work with when we partner guys up with balls. Say if there's two guys facing down the park and a partner's in behind him and he throws it over his shoulder, he would accelerate and kind of maybe catch that ball before it hits the ground a second time. And we can incorporate speed work into our skills work as well at the same time if we really are limited for time. I'm well aware there's a couple of coaches on here who've messaged me kind of directly, how do we squeeze all this in? But if it's a little bit of planning, we can definitely tick all those boxes. I suppose as well, it's important we kind of know what the coaches are planning for the rest of the session too. So we don't want to overload. If we're going to do a lot of straight line running, maybe would it be better to, Marion, if we go back to you, if we know for the skill session, I'm training with the under 15 team or whatever, and I'm saying, right, we're going to go into a lot of linear passing. When we do our warm up, and if we're taking maybe the first session early on in the week, and we want to add in some multi-directional work, how do we make sure that we are not replicating kind of what our drills are coming in to tick a different box again to maximize the time we have with our teams?
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right there, Gary. It's important to know and it's really good planning. So really good planning on our side from strength and conditioning, but also as a unit. So like we work as a unit with our coaches, we work as a unit with our physios and everything if we have the luxury of that. But it's really important to know what the session is ahead. So if our aim for the session is our linear, our maximum velocity, and they're actually going to do a lot of maximum velocity based work in training anyway, maybe that is the day to work on our drills that we feel is our limiting factor. So for an example, we don't get a lot of time to work on X. And actually, you know what, we're going to hit that target of max velocity in our session. That's great. This is actually our window of opportunity now, or a little kind of like golden nugget to work on something that we don't ordinarily get to work on, which is not maximum velocity. So maybe it's lateral turn to accelerate over 5, or maybe it's 1v1, like something really short and sharp, 1v1, something like that doesn't replicate in the session, so they're not getting overloaded. And like you said earlier, Gary, I think it's really important to notice that, because like we said, especially as players get older, 16, 17, by having that maximum velocity stimulus in their body once a week minimum is actually a protective mechanism for their soft tissue. It's worse to not do it than it is, well, I don't know if it's worse to not do it than it is to do loads of it, but they actually need that as a stimulus, So, yeah there you go.
I think it's something. I know. Obviously, I'm working with Dan at the minute, and we're lucky with the Wicklow seniors at the minute because we have the GPS, so we can kind of make sure they're ticking the high speed meters during the week. But again, I think Des previously would have told me when I was starting out and picking his brains about kind of getting a couple of, he nearly called them, injury prevention sprints early on, just to make sure they're getting those meters in. Have you want to add anything else before we move on to some of the questions on the speed section, or are you happy to move on?
Just one last thing, just kind of picking up what Marion was saying there about the efficiency. It's not just the kind of injury prevention stuff. It also means that their kind of tracking back runs or their supporting runs will be at a lower capacity. So if they have to run at a particular speed, if you can up their threshold, then it'll actually make them fitter in game speed terms as well, not just in the kind of a 100-meter dash type scenario.
Which effectively is what we're all about. We want to make these guys better footballers, to sort of better on the pitch rather than better athletes. We want to keep these guys on the pitch playing as well as they can and performing as often as they can at a high level as we can. Dan, anything more to add, or are you happy to move on?
No, I think that was spot on, and I think the robustness you get from exposure to maximal sprinting. I think we're going to talk about it later, but people don't get injured running at 5 meters per second. Very rarely. People get injured running at 8 meters per second, 9 meters per second. These sort of really, really high top speeds. So if we can get these exposures into these athletes, particularly, and get them into them when they're young, when someone's running at top speed, they might be having 5-6 times their body weight going through their single leg. Like it's one of the most effective tools to get people injury free or reduce the number of injuries you have. I think that's really important that people get that through as well.
100%. Okay, so Paul, we'll move along now. If you can move on to the questions here. I suppose in question one, I think, Dan, I assigned this one to you if you want to take this one. We have a lot of kids doing multiple sports here. How do we ensure that they are not overtrained, as there's huge benefit from playing multiple sports?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing I'll touch on is that, yes, there is a massive benefit from kids playing multiple sports. So I know studies in the NBA have shown that people who've played multiple sports in high school have much longer careers. They play much greater amount of games, and they have much less long-term injuries. So, Gaelic football or hurling is a late specialization sport. It's not an early specialization sport. So an early specialization sport would be something like gymnastics or diving, where kids have to be doing that from a very, very young age. I know that maybe some professional sports probably might be turning into, let's say football or something like that might be turning into an early specialization sport. But I think what we want people playing as many different games as possible. We want people doing athletics. We want people playing rugby. We want people playing Gaelic football because the crossover of skills and just the multiple amounts of movements that they're doing are really, really beneficial for them. And that's the reason I have that slide up there. I just want so that's from the GAA website. And that's just, the GAA policy is they want people playing lots of different games. They want people practicing different movements at all times. I think so. To be honest, this question it's taken me a long time to get to a point where I'm actually any good at managing this now. So the key that I have found when a lot of kids play multiple sports is communication. Okay, so there's a lot of guys in our school or in Blackrock College, the place that I spend the majority of my time, that are multi-sports athletes. So some of those actually complement each other, so they have different seasons. So one season will finish and the other one will start. So we might have some guys that are very good long jumpers, they're very good high jumpers. So the rugby season will finish and then they just do their high jump for the summer and then they come back to rugby. The problems that we've had in the past have been, I'll give you an example of one athlete who was just a high achiever and everything. So he played minor football with Kilmacud, he played minor hurling with Kilmacud and with Dublin, and he also was on our senior cup rugby team. So this guy was being pulled left and right by all these really, really high achieving sporting organisations, and the key for us was just communicating. And I go back to my time with the Dublin Miners as well. We had 4 guys on our minor football team who were also on the hurling team. So Cormac Costello, Conor McHugh, Eric Lowndes, they were all on the Dublin minor hurling team, but also got very, very far in that competition as well. So I have two main points on this. First is you need to be able to communicate with those other coaches. You need to be able to communicate with the managers or coaches of those other teams if they are playing multiple sports. And my stance on it is I will always be the first to give up control. So if I know that one of those players has done, if I've communicated with one of those players and I know that he's done a conditioning session on a Monday and he trains with us on a Tuesday, I know that he's just going to warm up with us, and any of the tactical work, he's just going to do that. He's not going to do any extra conditioning. He's not going to stay. I'm going to manage his pitch time as well. And I think that for me has been the most effective way of managing that. It's communicating with those other coaches, and it's being allowing yourself to give up control and not say, oh, he's training with us today, he's going to do everything. It's if a kid is playing multiple sports, I guarantee you he is by far fit enough. He doesn't need to be doing extra conditioning. He doesn't need to be doing any of these things because he's probably playing maybe 2 games a week, potentially 3 games a week. So that would be my advice: is communicate and have really open lines of communication. So, okay, if the guy's name is Niall, okay, what's Niall doing this week in football? What's Niall doing this week in hurling? And then I would always be the first to give up control. So if this athlete, Niall, let's say he's doing a conditioning session with his football team on Monday and he's training with us, that's fine. He's just going to do the skills and the tactical component on the Tuesday, and we're just going to manage his workload that way. That would be my advice for that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. I think encouragement, obviously, I love seeing the kids playing. There's too many kids sitting around on screen time. I think the studies recently are alarming. There's kids spending up to 5, 6, and 7 hours a day on screen time at the minute, and they're not kind of out on the pitch. They're not outdoor playing. They're not practicing these skills. So the ones that are playing, we want to maintain those kids. Want to keep them playing. And like you said, I think communication is key. Be that with the player, with the parent, with the coach, and kind of try educate the three. Even up to senior level, we had senior lads this year who were playing freshers, who were playing with us, who were had long runs with the clubs, and we kind of nearly had to restrain them and stop them trying, because obviously people want to play. Kids definitely want to play. They just want to keep playing games because they're bundles of energy. But we need to educate them on maybe why they need to rest or why they need to pull out of a session here and there. Definitely.
There's also a few things we can do as well, but it's quite labor intensive of actually just monitoring their performance. So if we know that there's a guy that's playing hurling, football, and let's say athletics or boxing or whatever it is, we can actually look to just put a simple monitoring system in place. So the simplest one I know is just take a standing long jump each day. So put your feet behind the line, jump forward as far as you can, and if that's consistently going down, we know that kid is potentially overtrained. If that standing long jump is remaining at the same level or maybe getting a little bit better, we know, okay, we have actually managed this guy's training load. Something like a questionnaire, okay, or like you said, just communicating with the athlete will be very good. Maybe a simple weigh-in might be good as well. If he's consistently losing weight, he's not eating enough, he's not sleeping enough, maybe he's training too much. So there's definitely metrics that we can take as well to give us more information to work with. Like you said, if you have access to GPS, like we would have had with the Wicklow seniors this year, we know one of our guys playing freshers, he's running 36, nearly 40k a week. We know he can't do conditioning with us. And like I said, that will always be my first stance as a coach, that I'm happy to be the first person to give up control to the team in order to protect that athlete.
Brilliant. Right then, Paul, if we move on to the next question, I think there's your next. So after identifying the player's training age and recognise how poorly they move, how can we incorporate remedial work without compromising his confidence, or her confidence for that matter?
Sorry, Mike was muted. It's a good question, and it is a difficult one to manage. I suppose the first thing to think of is kind of what you feel as a coach. You're obviously going to know these kids much better than anyone else. So kind of what you feel most comfortable with it. The one thing about the remedial work is that if we especially look at the speed stuff, it's probably going to be very similar to the work that you're doing with your athletes anyway, in terms of the basic drills, the positionings, and maybe it's just a case of slowing things down slightly. So they could still be doing the exact same drill as everyone else in the team, but you might just advise them to take a little bit slower, or you might advise them to work on a particular cue. So for example, everybody in the team could be doing some sort of A drill, but some are doing an A march, some are doing an A skip. So everyone's doing something similar, but it's slightly individualized. Or you could have them, so a remedial type exercise will be kind of lift your knee, so your hip and knee make a 90-degree angle, both of them, and they could just work on that lift. Whereas your more advanced athletes you could be telling them once they're in that position to hammer their foot down as hard as possible. So it's really just about kind of the cueing that you would do. The other thing to consider is how would you work on skills with your athletes? Do you like to kind of allot sessions in your time? So you might say, after our warm up, the first 5 or 10 minutes is where we work on whatever our perceived weaknesses is. So it could be kicking with our weakest foot. It could be passing to one side or the other. Maybe that's just a block where some kids do speed or strength work. Other kids do skills work. Maybe the goalkeepers do some sort of tactical stuff. So you could do it that way, or you're the type of coach that likes to give them kind of a little bit of homework to do, in which case you just got to give them, like you would say a kid who wants to work on their foot pass and kick the ball off the wall 20, 30 times or whatever. It's the same with the speed drills. You just send them home with the kind of basic stuff to do that will bring themselves up. But also just to continuously work with them. Maybe if the parent allows it, you could do some video work just to kind of show the child how they're improving as the weeks go on, because there's nothing kind of to tell a lie like a video. and you could just kind of boost their confidence that way, rather than, it's very difficult for a kid who's running as fast as they can, no matter how good or bad their mechanics are. They always feel like they're running as fast as they can. So sometimes you have to show them, and a video is a nice way of doing that. And then it's also to remember that whilst there are kind of optimal ways of sprinting, we're not looking for everybody to be Usain Bolt or Carl Lewis. We have a bandwidth of things that we like to see. So Dan, I know, has touched on some of the optimal positions, and I think he's going to talk a bit about later on about it. And yes, we do have those optimal positions, but remember, you know, whatever I am 5 foot, whatever my brother is 6 foot, you know, we're going to adopt slightly different positions when we're sprinting at max speed. So all those things come into it as well.
Yeah, it's very true. And again, like we say, some poor movers I know or I would have played with, when we put them in the game scenario, had probably the best game sense, or they could read the play better than some of the guys who moved really well, and they would nearly get there a yard ahead of others just because they were better at the actual game than the running mechanics. Some guys just didn't like that side of the training. I suppose when I corrected some of the, initially when I started GCA and in the gym setting, I used to correct some of the guys, and especially the lads, they nearly get offended or embarrassed when you're kind of correcting them early on, especially in front of a group. So I moved away from that and kind of nearly pulled them to a side and had, you know, just explained to them basically, I'm trying to make you the best version of yourself. So if we kind of adapt, and like we do with the skills, like you said, on a pitch, we will break down that movement pattern or wherever his restriction is in whatever exercise it is, and break his down a little bit, give him an extra bit of homework and tell him why he's doing it. Because there's nothing as bad if I was sitting in the corner watching the rest of the Wicklow football team doing something different, and I'm kind of feel like I'm little bit inferior because I'm doing something that they believe to be lesser than the other group. Little do they know it's probably more advantageous, but it's still, there is that kind of personal psychology, I suppose, of doing something different in the group. So if we educate them, and it goes back to point one, I suppose, with Dan, communicate with the players and with the parents and say, this is why we're doing this, or this is who's doing X, it'll definitely improve them, I think, in the long run. Paul, you want to slide on to question number 3 there for Marion? We'll bring you back in. And this came in a couple of times, a similar question, but kind of they were all asking the same type of thing. So how can I develop a program that kids of different body types can do and develop at their own pace? And it's kind of a common thing we see, especially in clubs and GAA. Kids just come with different ability. We have the guys who are overloaded playing every week and move really well, are really efficient to play a lot of sports, whereas we might have Gary who only trains twice a week. He'll only play GAA, and maybe he's not even there because he wants to be there. He's there because his dad drops him off, and it's, you know, so we have to alter programs to suit different body types and how they can develop at their own place.
I think thanks, Gary. It leads on quite well from Des's last question. I think, like, when we're looking at the basics of movement, the greater the foundations that we can build for these youth players, the stronger they'll be able to, like, lay structures onto their foundations. So the better that they're able to lunge, brace, hinge, squat, and then catch, pass, throw, and all that, the skill-based work. So the better they can do that now or at a younger age, the greater they will become when they get older, and ideally we're looking for that to transfer onto the field. So that's definitely something for us to consider. We took some Zoom classes with the 15 and 17 Glenealy boys over the COVID period, and that was our aim. So we were looking at, no matter what body shape, body type, not even like physical, but also like you could say like their ability to work hard. So like who has a high work rate, who actually wants to do the work. We looked at those basic movement patterns. So how they move, how well they move, how willing they are to work. So I think that's really important. And key things that we did for that was we looked at, instead of everyone having to do 10 repetitions of an exercise, say, for example, a push-up. So we broke it all the way back down. Instead of having to do 10 repetitions of a push-up, it was for 30 seconds. Quality of these push-ups that you can. So some guys might get 12, some guys might get 8, you know what I mean? So I think that's really important, so that they still feel like they've achieved something. Is that right? And also it's really important for guys in particular, I find, to have a clear structure or pathway of progression and also regression, because they always want to, you have a group of young guys and they all want to do full push-ups, and it might move terribly, you know, they move like an accordion. So it's important for us to start off on step 1, level 1, show them their progressive path. When you reach 10 of these style push-ups, it's this, so then they see clearly in their head where they're going with it, and they actually have set themselves goals, kind of like intrinsically as well. Also, another tip that I find really helpful, last point here, is that to pair, if you're in a group setting, to pair guys of similar ability off with each other. So that, not that you're, I don't mean that you're comparing apples and apples, because it's not necessarily that, but you're just comparing the guys who are of similar ability are like, how many did you get? I got 10. Oh yeah, I got 9. And the other guys across the way, I got 20 of these and 20 of these. Because the chances are these guys might be the best footballers on the field, but maybe physically they're a little bit at a loss. So it's important for them to feel good about what they're doing, that they do it really well, and that they see progression, I think.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that. Challenge point is the key. It has to be challenging enough for them. And the timing thing is great, because, like you say, some guys will do small reps, others will do large volumes of the push-up or whatever exercise it is. And it can be disheartening if I set a task for someone to do 12 push-ups and their arms are buckling after 5, after 6, after 7, and they just can't get there, regardless of how hard they try. Doesn't mean they're not working, or they're not pushing. They're probably pushing themselves harder than the guys that are able to hit the 12 mark. But again, just need to alter it, so make sure the same challenge point for those other guys, and set different targets, like you say, pair them up. It's a great example. And if we move on again, then I know we're tight on time, so Dan, we keep moving on. Then number 4, then please, Paul. This is quite similar now. So if any of these we've gone through some of these before, we'll just keep moving through and get through the other questions. So number 4 is, what's the best practice when there's a large variation in the S&C capability within a youth team? Some players with little or no background of team sports, or returning to team sport versus those who've operated at a consistent level since an early age.
Yeah, I think Marion's spot on. I think you need to have a progression and regression model that's well known to players, and the players on the team understand what's happening, so they don't feel like if you're regressing them that you are punishing them, because they won't like that at all. They have to understand their place within the program. And I think, Gary, you touched on it. To be honest, I think it's the psychological, or the group psychology, or the social psychology, which is actually most important. So this probably, when I reflected on my performance probably a couple of years ago, this isn't something that I did very well. So in every gym group, or every team that you take in a gym, there will be really, really high level performers that will just eat up everything you do. They're the strongest guys, the fastest guys, the fittest guys, and they will just do whatever you tell them. But at the other end, there's probably the guys that will struggle, and they don't feel that confidence in the gym. They feel intimidated in the gym, because these other guys, the same age as them, probably are lifting twice as much and are much more advanced. So it's about communicating with that player where they are in the system, and it's about making them comfortable with becoming the best version of themselves. So I look at a few players that came through our system on Blackrock over the last few years, and they were incredibly talented rugby players, like you said. Huge game awareness, huge technical ability, huge tactical ability, great leadership, but struggle in the gym side. And because I never communicated with them where they were in the program, they didn't connect with it. They didn't buy into the gym. The gym was something that they felt they had to do and they didn't really want to do. So I think the most important part is communicating with that athlete, making them know that you're not comparing him, you're comparing him or her to that top level performer. You just want him to be the best version of yourself. And I think that's the most important thing. I think that's the best practice of getting them psychologically bought in within that progression model of exercises. So if we're like you said, if we're to take a press up as an example, there is hundreds of variations of press ups. There is standard press up, weighted press up on rings, press up on a TRX, press up on the knees. There's so many different ways to do that, and when people are seeing progression, they will happily keep coming back. You will make them feel good about themselves, and they will keep wanting to train.
Absolutely, little wins, celebrate the little wins. If we move on, question 5 there, Paul, please. So Des, you're up again. Is it difficult to get right in terms of what exercise to do to aid S&C in the youth? What are the key areas to focus on?
So we would say the key areas, particularly with youth athletes, is what we would call their physical literacy. So their ability to move in multiple different directions, so multiple planes, multiple types of contractions, multiple, I suppose, range of forces running through the body. So things like, can they accelerate? Can they decelerate? Can they reach top speed? Can they run, jump? Can they land, balance on one leg? What's their proprioception like? So there are plenty of models out there, and I'm sure that's part of the package that Gary's going to release to them. But if you were to kind of touch on what Marion was saying and Dan were saying there, so we might use maybe, we would particularly use circuit training for time, as Marion alluded to there, in our youth S&C work. And there you would be looking for a mix of pushing, pulling exercises, squatting exercises, hip dominant or deadlift exercises. We'd be looking for some sort of bracing, which is for our trunk muscles. We would be looking for some sort of rotation, so twisting ab movements, and then we'd be looking for some sort of locomotion, which is things like hops or lunges or kind of repetitive movements like that. So there are set frameworks by people like Dan John that we would use for our S&C exercises, and really it's just making sure that we give them the full picture rather than giving them the exercises that they like. So for example, teenage guys love doing press-ups, so you'll end up with the kind of rounded shoulders position. So we just want to make sure that we balance that pushing exercise with rowing exercise to pull those shoulders back. So any of those kind of basic frameworks, there's multiple ones out there, just follow those, I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll move on again then, number 6, please, Pod. So there's a lot in this one. But how can we build stamina, speed, flexibility into training sessions and still get time for skills and match coaching?
This was very similar to one of the other questions as well, Gary, and I suppose it's quite, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bone of contention, but I'm sure as strength and conditioning coaches, we've all had these discussions with when we're working with head coaches and stuff. So we kind of spoke about it already in terms of our speed, and I'll touch on stamina and stuff now. But from like guided holistic approach, I think it's important to note that the training sessions complement each other. So what we do, we're trying to make the players better. What the coaches do, we're trying to make the players better. So all around, we're trying to make these players better football players. We're not trying to make them better runners. We're not trying to make them better Olympic lifting people in the gym, better sprinters, whatever. So I think it's important to understand that what we're all doing is like a joint approach to make the team and the player better. And the key part of that is through communication. So we used to work in 4 to 6 week blocks. So this is our training block for the next 4 to 6 weeks. What does the coach want to get out of that block? What do we want to get out of that block? Look at our non-negotiables. So as a strength and conditioning coach and our team is our priority, what is our non-negotiables? What do we want to get done in X, Y, and Z sessions? What are the coaches' non-negotiables? And then from there, I think it's really, we can then kind of have that periodized, planned approach. And then if anything comes off of that hasn't been planned, it's important to discuss it, support it with your rationale as to why you're having that approach and why you changed it or why the coaches changed it. So that's like the holistic, like managerial personnel side, I feel. From a stamina approach, it's important, like small-sided games, like Des was talking about, the circuits, intermixed with some skills. So the more football that these guys are doing, or the more time they have with the football in hand, interlinked or interspersed with our strength and conditioning work, such as circuits, medicine ball work, body weight work is important. So as opposed to running them for days, the more time they have with their hands on the ball, the better. It's important to look at our RPE in terms of gauging our training session load. So how long the session was, how the players rated it, so that we don't have that huge like monotony load, so that we have the right amount of variability, so they're getting enough stimulus within those sessions. In terms of speed, we spoke about that already. In terms of flexibility, it's important, I think, for them to have a consciousness of why we're doing a warm-up, what we do in a warm-up, so they kind of have a little bit of empowerment themselves, even though in the first 5 minutes of our warm-up to make sure that they have taken on board why they do it, what they're doing, and then similarly to that, consciousness in their cool down. So after a session, what do we do to ensure the blood doesn't pool in our body, to ensure that we get rid of some of the lactate, etc. So I think that a consciousness and empowerment is quite important, and that way it takes a little less of the stress of us trying to find areas within the session to do it. I hope that's answered the question. I kind of went about it a different way, but I think we've answered quite a lot of the other questions already in terms of stamina and speed. If you have anything else there.
No, I definitely think they're well into that previous question. But again, like we say, I suppose the best way to condition the athlete for the game demands is by playing the game. And like you say, if we're working on stamina development, we can manipulate the duration of a small sided game. We can manipulate the dimensions of the pitch or the rest periods, and all of those over time we can increase the stamina without, like, teams have gone away from this thought process of the let's finish a session with some long duration, some long continuous run for 6 minutes, for 8 minutes, for 10 minutes. And while they have a time and a place in training, maybe, if we only have these young guys for a couple of minutes, or a couple of hours a week, we want to maximize their ball in hand, like you said. A good point you made there is about mixing in maybe the games with the circuit training, as Des mentioned previously about the circuit training. One of the biggest mistakes I probably made when I introduced circuit training with any of the U teams, they really enjoyed the first session. And then the second session, they knew what was coming, and they were just there, oh no, this is kind of boring and monotonous. I didn't vary enough with the exercise. I didn't maybe do one round of the circuit, throw in some ball work or skills work, shooting practice, whatever it was, and then hit them with another round of the circuit. So that there are errors I made that kind of found when I altered that setup or that way of approaching it, I got far greater return, If we move on again then to number 7 there, Dan, please, Paul. What is the best practice when there's a large variation in the capability within a U team? Some players with little or no background in team sports return to team sports versus those that have operated at a consistent level since an early age.
I think that was the last question.
Right, sorry, yeah, I think that's just repeated there again. Sorry, is it again? Just skip on, Paul. So
yeah,
this is
the one for me. I think, to be honest, to answer this question properly will probably take a lot longer than probably the 2-3 minutes that I have. There's a lot of reasons why someone can lack speed, or there's a lot of reasons why someone can struggle running. So, to be honest, when I saw this question, probably the best one thing I'd say is, coaches massively value speed, right? Coaches, if you were to ask of any physical quality that they would want their players to have, they would say they want them to be able to move faster, change direction faster, and all these sort of things. So, does speed training have a place within your weekly plan? So unless you're actually setting apart 10 to 15 minutes every single week in the training schedule, you can't expect it to get better. Okay, so that's the first question I'd ask most coaches. I remember I did a sort of lecture series on speed for some Wicklow coaches this year, and I'd ask them how many people think speed is important. Every single coach would put up their hand. How many people spend time every single week training their players for speed, and maybe 50% of them put their hands up. So speed needs to have a place within the training week. And then I think, to be honest, there's actually some great courses out there that you can do over the course of a weekend, and you'll actually learn some really good stuff on speed mechanics and plyometrics, as Des said. So if you go to the Athletics Ireland website, there's an Athletics Ireland Level 1 course which costs €100 and is 25 hours, so it's over 2 weekends. And at the end of that, you have a certification. You will learn the Athletics Ireland model of teaching, throwing, jumping, and running. And if you want to set yourself apart as a youth coach, or you want to do the best job, for those kids that you're coaching, I think that's a really good next step to make. That question is quite a big question. I don't think I could answer it in 2 or 3 minutes. I would just say there's plenty of opportunities to upskill yourself and set yourself apart as a coach.
Yeah, I think the key message there is, Dan, it has to be practice. It has to be practiced repeatedly and regularly. And we will add a link into that course maybe when we email it the site as well. And any others. I know Exos have a free course as well at the minute on Absolute Speed. Just they put it
Yeah.
up since COVID started. Just click in, register, and it's free. There's 5 or 6 modules there. There's loads of speed, Absolute Speed tips. So we will add that in as well. Guys, I'm very conscious of time. We're an hour gone now. There's about another 10 questions. Are there any question on top out of those last bunch of questions that you feel it's really important to tick off before we go, Marion or Des or Dan, before we move on, kind of?
I think you've actually covered 2. Sorry, go ahead, Des.
Yeah, so there's one that I'd like to answer. It's about is it more important for players at 12 to 13 to do some specific S&C exercises, or is it more important to try to develop tactical ability first? I think that's quite important.
Well, if you find, I think. There you are.
Yeah, lovely. So just from what I'm seeing from this question is when they're talking about specific S&C exercises, they're maybe talking about exercises that might be specific to, let's say, kicking a football or something like that. And I think we need to be very, very careful about when we introduce specific exercises to a youth player or even a senior player. So I'll give you an example of some mistakes I made. So we had a very, very good rugby player in Blackrock College. He used to play hooker, so he used to throw the ball into the line out. So he would go home and he would probably throw 100 to 150 balls every single night. On top of that, then I gave him some specific exercises in order for him to improve his throwing. Okay, so stuff like heavy medicine ball throws and stuff like this, which, yes, it made his throwing better, but it also increased his likelihood of getting injured. Okay, so with our specific exercises, we need to be very, very careful with what we implement at an early age. So when I look back on that, what I actually should have done in order to make him robust and make him able to withstand the demands of rugby, you know, he ended up with some very, very serious shoulder injuries. What I should have done with his S&C program was actually just counteract the effects of throwing 100 or 150 balls every single night. So as Des said, if people do press ups all the time, okay, and young lads want to do press ups, they will develop that internally rotated shoulder posture. If people are throwing a heavy rugby ball over their head 100 and 150 times every single night, doing that 7 days a week, they will develop an imbalance. They will develop an imbalance of that shoulder joint. So what I should have done with his program, rather than programming specific S&C exercises, I should have programmed specific S&C exercises which counteracted what he did. So talking about scapular retraction working on the muscles at the back of the shoulder that control that shoulder joint. I think that would be much more important. So be very, very careful when you implement specific S&C work. I think at the youth athlete, we need to be actually thinking, well, how can I counteract the effects of what he's doing on the pitch? Okay, if he's a free taker, I know he's probably going to be kicking 150 balls every week. Okay, how can I counteract those effects? Okay, he will develop, you know, anyone that takes frees or anyone that's a place kicker in rugby will have a massive amount of imbalances. You know, how can we correct those imbalances within our S&C program? I think is actually how to solve that problem. Is it more important than developing technical ability first? No, I think, as Marion said, we need to lay as broad a foundation as possible. You know, so if we think of a pyramid, we want to have the widest foundation possible so we can get the highest peak possible. And that comes with, you know, everything has its place. I don't think anything really exists above the other. So technical, tactical, and that physical, emotional, and mental side of things are all just as important as each other.
Yeah, it's very important. Like S&C, it's only a cog in the wheel. There's a whole lot of things that goes on. Like if you talk about our technical, tactical, and our psychological kind of approach, the four-corner approach, like S&C is a small cog in the wheel when it comes to, like, there's questions in on nutrition and things, other aspects of performance as well. So while obviously we think S&C is hugely important and it has a hugely important role, it is not the be all end all. Like, we want them to be able to play their sport first. You know, a good kind of physical literacy and then a good strength and conditioning program and a long-term development approach will definitely help them play the sport better and move more efficiently and kind of continue to play the sport. Certainly it will, but at the end of the day, we want them to become camogie players or hurlers or footballers and to keep playing the game. And one thing on this question, kind of, I had thought that the 12 to 13 age, I wonder, was that inputted just because we know, say, the 12 to 14-year-old male, especially the females earlier are susceptible to kind of that peak height velocity growth spurt that occurs around that age. And we know the kids can kind of get dangly because their body is growing at such a huge rate. You will see a decrease in kind of flexibility and mobility around this period. So if anything, I would focus on kind of restoring kind of that mobility and that stability and around this period. It's a hugely important period in the player's development. So I think if you want to look into that, I'll attach an article as well on that. But we need to know that we kind of have to nurture them through this period, as guys they can actually nearly decrease from a performance capacity because their arms are lengthening, or they've lost kind of, maybe their judgment is off a little bit. But again, we need to kind of reinforce that confidence that they aren't decreasing in their ability as performers, and they might even slow down. We just need to let them know that it's only a growth spurt and that we can kind of alter as we go. Before we finish up, can I get 3 points? We know obviously this COVID is a strange period, and we're returning to play. I've had a couple of coaches on asking kind of what is the best practice or how to approach this kind of next phase, because obviously guys have been cooked up. Some have been training regularly, some have been doing very little. Some guys have been working non-stop on the front line and in different areas. Other guys have been cooked up in their house and haven't been able to leave. So there's a huge amount of kind of variables when these teams return. So could I get 3 kind of points maybe of that you would kind of bear in mind as you plan a session now, as these guys are like caged animals? I'd say all these lads and ladies are mad to get back onto the grass, so we need to kind of make sure we can keep them on the grass and they don't end up sitting back on the couch and injured again. So I suppose, Dan, we start with you first, if you don't mind. 3 points.
I'll hopefully I have 3 now, but I just think the main one is we need to look at, well, what events within the sport cause injury. So that would be that. If we look at all the data from the Bundesliga, we know that their injury rate has quadrupled since they started post-lockdown. Okay, so we need to make sure that we have a framework in place for preparing the players' bodies for the events that we know will cause injury. Okay, so if guys have been doing 5K runs, 6K runs, great. Okay, that's great for their aerobic development, but people don't get injured. People don't tear hamstrings or tear groins on a 5K run. Okay, they tear groins or they tear hamstrings sprinting at maximal velocity, changing direction very, very quickly, decelerating very, very quickly, jumping, landing, and then on top of this, we also have this contact element, which no one has been doing. So you can have a very, very well-versed running program, but nobody has been exposed to the collisions or the contacts, which will be up and running, I suppose, from the 29th of June. So I think we need to make sure that we have a framework in place for preparing our bodies or their bodies for these events. So accelerating, changing direction, decelerating, jumping, landing, and then those contacts as well. So my stance, we've some of the teams that I've trained are starting back training now, and my mindset is always, what's the minimal effective dose? So what's the minimum that we can do that we know that we will get some sort of performance improvement? The last thing that I want to do is have the guys come down and I smash them with, let's say, a game volume of running or something like that. That's the last thing I want. I want a minimal effective dose, maybe 2-3 exposures to 10 meters or maybe even 15 meters of speed, some running volumes, and that's pretty much about it. That's what training will look like for the next couple of weeks, is jumping mechanics, landing mechanics. In terms of our return to contact stuff, we're just going to do rolling, tumbling, some sprawling, maybe some light wrestling and stuff like that, and maybe build that up from there. But I just think we need to be very, very careful of training content, and training can't look like what training looked like in February. It has to be probably what it looked like back in September, or what it started then.
Yeah. Excellent. Marion or Des? Marion, if you want to jump in next.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, that's what Dan covered it quite a bit there as well. But I think it's important to recognise that a lot of aerobic power is the basis of increased performance, especially with underage guys. If you look at Riley study in 2015, when they were saying you're looking to cover up to 6.7 kilometers per game for these youth players, and that can be at 85% of their peak heart rate. So looking at, again, like I said earlier, like the base and support. So what have they been doing up to over this period? How have their return to the hamstring, crazier things have happened? Have they been doing like shorter, sharper stuff, and they still have withheld the volume that they've been doing? So what have they been doing? How do they come out the other side of that? I think it's important to recognise like that. Look at the date of your first game and work back. So if your date of your first game is whatever 6 weeks away, work back. So you want to be in your best physical shape or whatever you to perform on that date. What do we need to do to get there? That means you have 6 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to build into that. So that you actually don't panic and you build quite gently. And lastly, I think it's just important to recognise how different training stimulus affect the body. So you have your long, slow, steady stuff, type 1. Then type 6, you have your high interval, change of direction, agility-based work. And there's 5 steps in between there, or whatever, from type 1 to type 6. So you're building from type 1, 5-kilometer run, up to type 6, short, sharp, agility style, 1v1, game-based styles. So it's important to build quite progressively with that. That you reduce the risk of injury, because what you don't want to happen is that you overload the players in maybe the first 2 weeks. They would stand there for a week, maybe 10 days. After 2 weeks, they start to break down. So slowly but surely start to add more change of direction stimulus, maybe more one-on-one contact style work, and even like make the training pitch smaller initially, perhaps, so they're covering less space, and then start to open up a little bit if possible.
Excellent. And Des, finally?
Yeah, I suppose I'd just reiterate what the guys have already said. We're kind of in a training to train type phase now. So we're coming back training so that we can train for things like championship or tougher games. And as the guy said, just consider what your athletes have done over the break, maybe a questionnaire, or, an anonymous questionnaire over Google Sheets or something, and just ask them what they've been doing. If they've been doing a lot of 5Ks and stuff, as Dan was saying, they're going to need to do more kind of repeated sprint, repeated acceleration, deceleration, that kind of stuff. So look at what they've done and just kind of give them that extra stimulus that they need. As Marion said, just make sure that you're kind of keep the leash on them a little bit in the first couple of sessions. It's better to get through that first week or two with nobody injured and a full panel than to have broken a couple of eggs along the way. And obviously just go out and enjoy it. Like, I think I got a text message yesterday about a training session, and I'm like a kid at Christmas now because I get to go to Shouted Lads tomorrow night. It's great fun. So yeah, just really, especially with the younger kids, just, let them enjoy it as much as possible those first few nights back. Yeah.
100%. I think, I definitely think communication kind of with them and maybe monitoring while we go to the next couple of weeks is going to be key for all of us, I think if we look at even up to adults, I think the teams that manage this next period of kind of 4 to 6 weeks of training, and they manage the load well, I think that I guarantee you they'll be the guys who are lifting the silverware and the business end of the year, of the short condensed year for that matter. I'll agree with you, Des.
Sorry, Gary, just to come in on that, and just like injuries are going to happen, like we've seen in the Bundesliga and the Premier League, the spike in injuries. So, if these things happen, I wouldn't be beating ourselves up as coaches about it either.
Yeah, totally agree. So I think just to wrap up there, Paul, is there any questions that have come in there, or does anyone want to add anything before we finish up? Just so I presume that's a no then. So just to wrap things up, there's a couple of links here. I think those Kildare GAA webinar series, it's an excellent. There was 5 series recently. It's Paul Divley put it together as an absolutely excellent series. They really in-depth look. I know we touched on a lot of things here, and I hope we answered questions for those that sent them in. But that webinar series is superb. There's a lot of really good stuff on there if you want to click in and you can look in detail. There's exercises, there's a lovely YouTube channel. That there's a demands of elite under 17 Gaelic football there. I think it was Damien Young. He looked at the Monaghan under 17s monitored for 6 or 7 games and kind of show you a real in-depth insight into demands of kind of UGA football. Just bear in mind, it was they're 70-minute games, obviously, and they're one of the strongest teams in Ulster at the time. So don't try to do that with an under 17 Arclogers team or whatever. But again, it gives you good insight in the kind of distance covered, into the speeds they were working at and the amount of speeds, the acceleration, deceleration, really insight into it. We will add more. There's questions that haven't been answered there that I will answer and send back through email. But just for now, I'd like to thank Paul and Wicklow GA for having us on, and we want to thank Dan, Marion, and Des on. It's superb to listen to you, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, just on that as well, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, just on that, just like to continue by saying as well, you know, it's great to have such knowledge on a webinar, and you know, and ourselves in Wicklow Coaching Games are really appreciative of the four of you coming on there tonight. Just a few little things I picked up on it, you know, and I'm not quoting this exactly here, but Des there mentioned like thinking speed is a skill. Like that's something like that, you know, us as coaches, we need to think that, you know, speed is really, really important, but we need to practice it in our training session. I suppose when I started coaching, you know, you might spend 5 or 6 minutes at it, you know, in the summer, you know, you never practice it for most of the year. So I think we need to think speed is a skill and coach it like you coach any other area, you know, in relation to technical or tactical skills and stuff like that. Dan mentioned there communicating to players and making them comfortable in being the best versions of themselves. I think that's a real one that sticks with me, even like, you know, like when I was playing, like I was probably didn't like doing weights and stuff like that, but it was never put to me like in that kind of way that, you know, let's be comfortable in being the best version of yourself, like as regards, like I was never going to be able to be lifting huge weights in a gym, but if it was put to me like that, you know, I probably would have been a lot stronger. And then Marion spoke about creating the foundations, like, you know, earlier for players. So at a younger level, if we create, you know, stronger foundations, you know, they're going to be better down the line. So it's important that we practice as coaches, like developing speed and all that kind of stuff in relation to, you know, condition and strength at an early age. And if we do that, we'll have better athletes at, you know, when they get to senior level. So just again, just to thank everyone, and especially thank Gary there who put all this together. I know I work with Gary there regularly with the GCA squads, and I know he's involved with Wicklow, and we're very lucky to have him. So we're very appreciative, Gary, of you putting this together and getting all the guest coaches on there tonight. So thanks very much.
Brilliant, then. So just thanks for you for attending, and we'll wrap it up with that. Thanks a million, guys.
Thanks, Gary. See you later.
Thanks, Gary. Bye.
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 See you, Des.
See you, lads.